The small music venue was buzzing with excitement. People had gathered to enjoy the live band that was playing their favorite songs. The smell of popcorn, coffee, and a hint of leather from the crowd mixed in the air, giving the place a lively, almost electric atmosphere. Everyone was chatting, laughing, and moving to the rhythm of the music. Among them, one person stood out, not because of his clothes or style, but because of the way he carried himself. He had a presence that demanded attention, but it wasn't a kind of presence that made people feel safe or welcomed. It was the presence of someone who thought the world revolved around him. He rode into the venue on a shiny black motorcycle, the engine roaring loudly and drawing the eyes of everyone in the room. The sound of the engine echoed off the walls, making some people jump in surprise. A few children covered their ears, and a couple of older men frowned at the disruption. The biker didn't care. He was used to commanding attention wherever he went. As he parked his bike inside the entrance, people whispered to each other. Some were impressed by his confidence and his bike, while others felt uneasy about his boldness. He didn't just walk into the room. He stormed in, like a force of nature that couldn't be ignored. His clothes were worn leather, decorated with patches that told stories of countless rides and reckless adventures. Scars and marks on his jacket hinted at past accidents and fights, but he wore them proudly, as if each one was a badge of honor. His boots clunked heavily on the wooden floor, each step making it clear he owned the space now, at least in his mind. The biker scanned the room, his eyes sharp and calculating, looking for a reaction from the crowd. Some people looked away, feeling the tension his gaze brought. Others tried to act normal, pretending they weren't noticing him. But it was impossible to ignore the aura of arrogance that surrounded him. He made his way to the bar, leaning casually against it and ordering a drink in a voice that demanded attention. The bartender, a young man with a friendly smile, hesitated for a moment before serving him. Sensing the intensity of the biker's personality, as he sipped his drink, he surveyed the room with a smirk, as if silently judging everyone around him. He laughed loudly at a joke he made to himself, drawing more eyes his way. He seemed to thrive on the discomfort and curiosity of others, feeding off their reactions like it was a game. Meanwhile, the band on stage continued playing, oblivious to the storm that had entered their world. The guitarist strummed a melody, the drummer kept a steady beat, and the singer's voice carried smoothly over the music. The audience was enjoying the performance, swaying to the rhythm, clapping, and occasionally singing along. There was an easy camaraderie in the air, a sense of shared enjoyment. But the biker's presence began to change that. The atmosphere, once warm and inviting, now carried a subtle tension like a storm cloud drifting over a sunny field. The biker didn't just watch the band. He studied them, as if evaluating their worth. He leaned closer to the stage, arms crossed, and made a few snide comments under his breath. Some people in the crowd overheard him, and their smiles faded. A few whispered warnings to their friends, sensing that something might happen if the biker's arrogance continued unchecked. But most were unsure how to react. Confronting him could be risky, and ignoring him might allow his behavior to escalate. Everyone instinctively knew they were dealing with someone unpredictable. He laughed again, louder this time, drawing the attention of the drummer. The drummer, a young man with quick reflexes, glanced at the biker with a polite nod but kept playing. The biker's smirk widened, enjoying the challenge of being noticed without being confronted directly. He leaned closer to a group of people near the stage, making exaggerated gestures as if to say, "I'm the one in charge here." The crowd began to murmur, some people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. A few friends tried to distract themselves, clapping along with the music or talking louder to drown out the tension. But the biker's energy was contagious in a negative way, and the room's lively atmosphere was slowly being replaced by unease. The sense of enjoyment was still there, but it was mixed with a feeling of uncertainty. Everyone was waiting without realizing it for something to happen. At one point, the biker walked past the guitarist, who was focused on his solo, and gave him a mocking look. The guitarist, sensing the hostility but trying to remain professional, kept playing. The biker's smirk grew, his confidence fueled by the fact that no one had confronted him yet. He took a step closer to the stage, brushing a hand over a nearby speaker as if to assert dominance. His actions were deliberate, designed to provoke a reaction without openly attacking anyone. The tension in the room increased and whispers spread like wildfire. A couple of audience members exchanged nervous glances. One of them, a tall man sitting near the front, leaned over to his friend and whispered, "Something's going to happen. I can feel it." His friend nodded, keeping his eyes on the biker. Everyone seemed to sense that this was a turning point. The biker's arrogance had reached a level where it was no longer just annoying. It was dangerous. The crowd was holding its collective breath, unsure if the situation would escalate or if it would fizzle out on its own. The biker, oblivious to the concern he was causing, took another sip of his drink and laughed again, louder and more obnoxiously. He began pacing near the stage, scanning the room for reactions. His smirk suggested he was enjoying the attention, even if it was mixed with fear and unease. He leaned over to a group of young men and made a comment about their music taste, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Some laughed nervously, while others looked away, hoping he would move on. The guitarist finished his solo and stepped back, giving a polite nod to the audience. The biker took this as an opportunity, stepping closer and making a gesture as if challenging the guitarist. The crowd tensed. It was clear that the biker was seeking to dominate, to make a statement that no one could ignore. The energy in the room shifted from enjoyment to suspense. Every eye was on him, every ear tuned to his next move. The biker's arrogance was like a live wire in the room, sparking reactions from every corner. Some people were fascinated, drawn to the raw confidence and recklessness. Others were worried, sensing that a collision was imminent. The mix of curiosity and fear created a charged atmosphere, where anything could happen. It was the kind of moment that people remembered, even if they didn't fully understand why. As the band continued playing, the biker's presence overshadowed their performance. The music, once the center of attention, now served as a backdrop to his antics. He walked to the front of the stage, leaning casually on the edge, and scanned the crowd with a knowing smile. It was clear he thought he was untouchable, a force that no one could challenge. The audience felt the weight of his arrogance, and a quiet tension settled over the room. Like a storm about to break, in that moment, the biker didn't notice someone at the back of the room, standing tall and calm, observing him closely. This person's presence was subtle but powerful, contrasting sharply with the biker's loud, showy energy. The room hadn't noticed him yet, but a few observant eyes caught the difference immediately. There was a sense of impending balance, a feeling that the biker's arrogance might soon meet something it couldn't easily overpower. For now, the biker continued his display, pacing and laughing, enjoying the uneasy attention. He had no idea that the calm observer at the back was already assessing the situation and preparing to intervene if needed. The tension in the room was palpable, a delicate thread stretched between chaos and control. Everyone could feel that the moment was building, that the biker's arrogance would soon be tested in a way he couldn't anticipate. And so, the scene was set: a small music venue, a crowd of eager fans, a talented band on stage, and a biker whose arrogance filled the room like a storm cloud. The air was thick with anticipation, the energy shifting from casual enjoyment to suspense. Everyone waited, holding their breath, not knowing exactly what would happen next, but sensing that the biker's presence would soon lead to a moment that no one would forget. The first act was complete, but the story was only beginning, and the room felt it in every heartbeat and every glance toward the stage. The biker moved closer to the stage, his boots making heavy thuds against the wooden floor. The crowd's nervous murmurs grew as he leaned on the edge of the stage, eyeing the instruments with a calculating look. The guitarist was adjusting his equipment, unaware that someone was so close. The biker's eyes lingered on the guitar, a beautiful, polished instrument that gleamed under the stage lights. There was something about it that sparked a dangerous curiosity in him. He smirked and leaned over the stage a little further, brushing his hand across the edge of the guitar case. A few audience members exchanged worried glances, sensing that the biker's behavior was about to cross a line. They whispered to each other, hoping he wouldn't do something foolish. Some wanted to step forward to intervene, but instinct held them back. Confronting a man like this felt risky. The biker thrived on attention, and any resistance might provoke him. Instead, they watched quietly, holding their breath. The biker laughed, a low, mocking sound that echoed across the room. He tilted his head, eyeing the guitarist and the other musicians as if challenging them. The guitarist caught a glimpse of him from the corner of his eye but continued playing, hoping the man would lose interest. The biker, however, was only warming up. He shifted his weight, leaning closer to the stage, and made a show of examining the guitar. The polished wood, the gleaming strings, and the careful craftsmanship seemed to irritate him. It wasn't enough that the guitar existed. In his mind, it had to be dominated or destroyed. He reached down and picked up the guitar case, opening it with deliberate care. The audience gasped softly as they realized what he was doing. Some people stood up, unsure of whether to stop him or run. The biker ignored their reactions, his focus entirely on the instrument. He lifted the guitar from its case and held it in his hands, turning it over as if inspecting it. There was a cruel curiosity in his eyes, a thrill that came from pushing boundaries and testing limits. The guitarist finally looked up, sensing the seriousness of the situation. He tried to speak, to ask the biker to put the guitar down, but his voice was drowned out by the biker's booming laughter. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable moment. Some people whispered prayers under their breath, hoping the situation wouldn't escalate. The biker didn't care. He was caught in a moment of reckless excitement, feeding on the fear and tension in the room. With a sudden motion, the biker slammed the guitar down onto the stage. The strings snapped with a sharp, painful twang, and the body of the guitar cracked under the force. The sound was shocking, ringing through the venue and silencing the music for a brief moment. The audience froze, staring in disbelief. A few people gasped aloud, their hands covering their mouths. The guitarist stepped back, wide-eyed, frozen by the sudden destruction of something he cared deeply about. The biker laughed triumphantly, holding the broken guitar up like a trophy. His arrogance had reached its peak, and he seemed to believe that no one could challenge him. He paced back and forth on the stage, his smirk growing wider with every step. The crowd's whispers turned into murmurs of fear and disbelief. The music had stopped, replaced by the sound of the biker's laughter and the stunned silence of the audience. It was a moment of chaos where arrogance clashed with the calm order that had existed moments before. People in the front row stood up, trying to distance themselves from the biker. Some whispered urgent warnings to others, while a few tried to gesture for him to stop. But the biker was too absorbed in his own show, too confident in his invincibility. He mocked the reactions, pointing at the audience and laughing at their discomfort. His arrogance was almost palpable, a heavy weight in the room that pressed down on everyone present. The guitarist recovered slightly, stepping forward and speaking firmly, though his voice trembled with shock. He asked the biker to put the guitar down and leave the stage. The biker ignored him, waving his hand dismissively and shouting over the noise. The tension in the room was thick, and people could feel that this situation could spiral out of control at any moment. Some tried to call for help, their voices shaky, while others simply held their breath, hoping someone with authority would intervene. The biker's energy was chaotic and unpredictable. He spun the broken guitar around, making a show of the destruction he had caused. The audience's unease grew, as did the sense that something serious was about to happen. The biker was testing limits, pushing boundaries, and enjoying every second of it. He seemed almost unaware of the consequences, as if he believed that his arrogance and confidence could protect him from any reaction. A few of the crowd members tried to step forward to calm the situation, but the biker's intimidating presence made them hesitate. His eyes were sharp and his body language screamed dominance. He looked around, making sure everyone noticed him, soaking in the fear and attention he commanded. It was clear that he had no intention of stopping, at least not until something or someone intervened. As the biker continued his display, the atmosphere in the room became tense and electric. People were on edge, unsure of what would happen next. The musicians on stage kept their distance, trying to remain calm, but the disruption had shaken them. The music, which had been the heart of the venue, was now a background to the biker's reckless behavior. The audience could feel the shift, and a sense of anticipation filled the air. Something significant was about to occur, and everyone could sense it. Among the crowd, a few observant eyes caught a change. Someone who had been quietly standing at the back of the room was now stepping forward, moving with purpose. There was a calm authority in their movements, a contrast to the biker's chaotic arrogance. The tension grew even thicker as this person approached, and the audience's attention slowly began to shift. They weren't sure who this was yet, but they could feel the balance of power beginning to change. The biker, oblivious to this new presence, continued his antics. He slammed the broken guitar onto the stage again, laughing and mocking the crowd's reactions. His arrogance had blinded him to the fact that someone was about to challenge him, someone whose presence demanded respect rather than fear. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. The crowd's emotions were a mix of fear, curiosity, and relief that someone with authority was moving forward. The musicians on stage exchanged glances, realizing that the situation could soon be resolved without further destruction. The audience felt a sense of hope building, knowing that the chaos might soon be stopped. The biker finally noticed the approaching figure and tried to intimidate them, pointing and laughing. But there was something different about this person, a quiet confidence that didn't waver under his gaze. The biker's smirk faltered for a brief moment, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. For the first time, he sensed that his arrogance might not be enough to control the situation. The audience, sensing the shift, leaned in slightly, eager to see how this encounter would unfold. The moment stretched, charged with anticipation. The biker's arrogance and recklessness had led him to this point, and now he faced someone who exuded authority without raising their voice. The tension in the room was almost tangible, as if time itself had slowed, waiting for the first move. The audience was captivated, their attention fixed on the stage and the approaching figure. Everyone knew that this was the turning point, the moment where arrogance would meet authority, and the consequences would become clear. And so, the scene was set for an unforgettable confrontation. The biker, who had thought he was untouchable, was about to face someone who could match his presence with calm strength. The room, once filled with casual enjoyment of music, was now charged with suspense and curiosity. The audience watched closely, knowing that what happened next would leave a lasting impression, not just on the biker, but on everyone who witnessed the events unfold. The story had moved from arrogance to recklessness, and the next moment would determine the outcome for everyone involved. The room seemed to hold its breath as the figure moved closer. He wasn't loud or dramatic. There was no rush, no showiness. Instead, he walked steadily, confidently, and with a quiet authority that somehow filled the space more than the biker's roaring energy ever had. People instinctively stepped aside, giving him a clear path, sensing that this was someone who could handle the chaos without struggle. The biker, meanwhile, was still pacing near the broken guitar, laughing and shouting, confident that no one would dare challenge him. The figure at the back continued forward, eyes calm but alert, scanning the biker's movements and the reactions of the crowd. There was no fear in his expression, no hesitation. He simply walked, each step purposeful, each movement controlled. The contrast between the two men was striking. One was loud, chaotic, and impulsive. The other was quiet, composed, and in complete control. The energy in the room shifted as people realized that the balance of power was about to change. The biker finally noticed him and paused mid-step, squinting against the lights. At first, he didn't recognize him. He tilted his head, a smirk forming as if to mock the newcomer silently. "Who's this guy?" he muttered under his breath. Then slowly the recognition hit him. The air seemed to thicken as the biker's smirk faltered. Suddenly he was no longer the center of control. For the first time in the evening, uncertainty crept into his demeanor. The figure didn't rush. He simply stepped onto the edge of the crowd, making his presence known without aggression. The audience instinctively backed up a few steps, creating space between the biker and the approaching authority. The biker raised his hands, partly in mock surrender, partly to assert himself still. The energy in the room crackled with tension. Everyone knew something monumental was about to happen. "Put the guitar down," the newcomer said calmly, his voice firm but not angry. There was no shouting, no dramatic gestures, but the words carried weight. They cut through the chaos like a knife demanding attention. The biker laughed, a short, mocking laugh, thinking this was some kind of joke. He looked around, expecting the crowd to cheer for him or to step in on his side. But the room was silent, everyone waiting to see what would happen next. The biker stepped closer, trying to intimidate him, pointing at the newcomer and shaking his finger. "And what are you going to do about it?" he shouted. The calm figure didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, didn't move in anger. Instead, he just looked at the biker with a steady gaze, eyes locking on his without blinking. It was the kind of stare that made people realize instantly that they were dealing with someone they could not manipulate. The biker's confidence wavered ever so slightly. People in the crowd whispered to one another, some holding their breath in anticipation. The musicians on stage froze, unsure whether to continue playing or step back completely. The guitarist, still stunned by the broken guitar, took a deep breath, knowing that the real resolution was no longer in his hands. The energy in the room shifted from chaos to tense expectation. Everyone was watching the silent duel between arrogance and authority. The newcomer took a slow, deliberate step forward. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't yell. He simply moved with a calm confidence that radiated control. The biker's laughter started to fade as he realized that the man approaching him was not intimidated by his size, his motorcycle, or his display of reckless power. He was facing someone who demanded respect in a way that couldn't be undermined by bravado. "Step back," the newcomer said, still calm. "That guitar is not yours to destroy." His words were simple, direct, and final. There was a firmness that brooked no argument. The biker opened his mouth to reply, but he stopped, sensing the weight of the words. There was no threat, no show of violence, yet the authority in the voice carried more impact than any loud shout could. The crowd felt the shift instantly. Tension gave way to awe as they watched the exchange. The biker's smirk faded completely. He fidgeted, trying to regain his confidence, but the room's energy had changed. The spectators were no longer reacting to him. They were waiting for the newcomer to act. The calm, authoritative presence had silenced the chaos, and even the biker realized that he was no longer in control. The audience could feel the difference, and a quiet murmur of approval ran through the room. People were impressed not just by the newcomer's composure, but by his ability to command attention without raising a hand. The biker made a sudden, aggressive move, stepping toward the newcomer as if to assert dominance, but the calm figure did not react with anger. He simply shifted slightly, creating a small barrier with his stance, unflinching and unwavering. The biker stopped, caught off guard by the stillness and confidence of the person in front of him. The silence was deafening. The audience held their breath, sensing the tension at its peak. For a few moments, the two men stood facing each other, a silent battle of presence and willpower. The biker's arrogance had carried him through countless encounters, but this was different. He was no longer the center of control. The newcomer's authority made that clear. The biker laughed nervously, trying to fill the silence with bravado, but it rang hollow. The crowd sensed the shift and leaned in slightly, captivated by the moment. Finally, the newcomer spoke again, his tone calm but firm. "Leave the guitar and leave the stage. You've had your fun. It ends here." The words were simple, yet they held the weight of absolute certainty. The biker's confidence cracked further. He looked around, seeing the faces of the audience watching him, seeing the musicians waiting and realizing that he could no longer intimidate anyone. The room had shifted against him, and he understood that his arrogance had reached a dangerous limit. The biker's smirk faltered completely. He dropped his hands and took a step back, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. For the first time that night, he felt regret, though he tried to mask it with a laugh. The audience sensed it too, the moment when arrogance meets authority and loses. The newcomer's calm strength had not only stopped the reckless actions, but had reminded everyone in the room that true authority doesn't need to shout or threaten. It simply exists, and respect follows naturally. The crowd began to relax slightly, the tension easing as the biker stepped away from the stage. The guitarist recovered his composure, taking a deep breath and adjusting his broken instrument, grateful that the situation hadn't escalated further. The musicians resumed their positions, the band quietly preparing to continue their performance. The energy in the room was still charged, but it was no longer fearful. It was filled with admiration for the quiet power that had restored order. The biker, now standing a few steps away, looked around nervously. He realized that his actions had consequences, and that the calm figure in front of him had made that clear without a single act of violence. The crowd watched closely, some nodding in relief, some whispering to their neighbors about what they had just witnessed. The room had witnessed a rare moment where arrogance collided with authority, and authority had emerged victorious, quietly and decisively. The newcomer didn't speak again. He simply stood there, composed, giving the biker enough space to retreat without losing face entirely. It was a masterful display of control, showing that strength is not always loud or aggressive. The audience was captivated, not just by the resolution of the conflict, but by the lesson it conveyed, that arrogance, no matter how bold, meets its match when faced with true authority. The biker finally stepped back fully, his head slightly lowered, a clear sign of defeat. He muttered something under his breath and turned toward the exit, retreating from the stage. The crowd's tension lifted immediately, replaced by murmurs of relief and admiration. People whispered about what had just happened, the story already forming in their minds as a memorable experience. The room's energy shifted back to enjoyment, though it was now tinged with the respect and awe inspired by the calm intervention they had witnessed. The guitarist, though saddened by the broken instrument, felt a sense of gratitude. The situation could have ended much worse, but the newcomer's intervention had prevented further chaos. The band members exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the extraordinary presence that had restored order without aggression. The audience, meanwhile, remained captivated, discussing the moment quietly but with excitement. It was clear that the evening had taken on a story beyond music, a story of arrogance, authority, and the lesson that some forces cannot be challenged by mere bravado. The biker exited the stage area quietly, defeated and humbled. The newcomer remained for a moment, allowing the tension to fully dissipate before returning to the background. The room slowly resumed its rhythm, the music picking up again, the crowd clapping and moving to the beat. But the memory of the confrontation lingered in every mind. People knew they had witnessed something remarkable, a moment where arrogance had been confronted not with aggression, but with calm authority, and had instantly faltered. The lesson was clear, and the impression it left would not be forgotten by anyone who had been there that night. The biker's chest heaved, his arrogance deflating like a balloon that had been punctured. The adrenaline that had fueled his reckless actions was replaced by a growing sense of dread. He glanced around at the crowd, and for the first time he noticed the looks of shock and disapproval. Eyes that had previously been wary or afraid were now sharp and judging. The weight of the moment settled on him, pressing down harder than any physical force could. He had made a mistake, and it was clear to everyone, most of all to him. He stepped back, rubbing the back of his neck as if trying to shake off the realization. The laughter that had come so easily now felt hollow and forced. The broken guitar lay on the stage, its strings twisted and splintered, a physical reminder of his impulsive arrogance. He stared at it, a wave of regret washing over him. The excitement and thrill of dominating attention had vanished, replaced by the sinking knowledge that he had crossed a line he couldn't easily undo. The crowd remained silent, the tension still lingering but shifting from fear to anticipation. The musicians on stage, recovering from their shock, quietly assessed the situation. The guitarist, though visibly upset, didn't rush forward. There was an unspoken understanding that the confrontation had already spoken volumes. The biker's actions had consequences, and the lesson was unfolding before everyone's eyes. He swallowed hard, realizing that the presence of the calm, authoritative figure had not only halted his reckless behavior, but also shattered his illusion of control. Every step, every gesture he had made earlier seemed foolish in retrospect. He had acted as if he was untouchable, but now he understood that some forces in life could not be challenged by sheer bravado. His mind raced with thoughts of what could have happened if things had escalated further. The fear that had been absent moments ago now consumed him. The biker's shoulders slumped, his posture betraying the weight of his regret. He looked around, noticing the subtle nods of approval and relief from the audience. People were quietly acknowledging the calm authority that had restored order. The realization hit him hard. He had been the cause of unnecessary fear and disruption. The music, once the center of the night's enjoyment, had been overshadowed by his arrogance, and now he had to face the consequences of that. A few members of the crowd whispered among themselves, commenting on the dramatic shift. "I can't believe he just stopped him without raising a hand," one said. Another added, "That was incredible. Calmness like that is stronger than any shout." The biker overheard snippets of these conversations, and each one felt like a reminder of his mistake. The authority he had underestimated had made him look foolish, and he could feel the embarrassment creeping in. He glanced at the stage, where the guitarist gently set the broken guitar aside. The musician's hands trembled slightly, but his eyes were focused and composed. The biker realized that he had not only disrespected the instrument, but also the hard work and passion of the people on stage. The magnitude of his arrogance became painfully clear. He had acted without thinking, without considering the impact of his actions on others, and now he faced the silent judgment of the room. The calm figure remained nearby, watching the biker carefully. There was no need for harsh words or dramatic gestures. His presence alone conveyed authority and control. The biker felt the intensity of that gaze, realizing that this person represented consequences, respect, and restraint all at once. The contrast between his impulsive recklessness and the newcomer's composed strength could not have been more evident. Every instinct he had relied on to assert dominance now felt inadequate. He took a hesitant step backward, his mind racing with regret. The laughter, the gestures, the false bravado, all of it now seemed meaningless. The crowd's silence pressed in on him, emphasizing the enormity of his actions. He wanted to apologize, to undo the damage, but he knew that some things could not be fixed so easily. The broken guitar, the fear he had caused, and the embarrassment he felt were tangible reminders of his mistake. The biker's voice trembled slightly as he finally spoke, though he tried to keep it steady. I didn't mean to. He trailed off, realizing that words could not fully express his regret. The calm figure nodded subtly, acknowledging the admission without ridicule or harshness. It was a silent reinforcement that accountability mattered more than punishment, and that humility was the first step toward making things right. The audience watched closely, sensing the transformation. The biker, once the center of chaotic attention, was now visibly humbled. His arrogance had been stripped away, replaced by a new awareness of limits and consequences. The musicians on stage slowly resumed their positions, the tension gradually easing as the biker's realization became evident. The night was no longer about confrontation, but about reflection and understanding. He glanced at the audience again, noticing the mixture of surprise, relief, and quiet admiration. People were no longer fearful. They were observing a man confronted with his own mistakes and learning the value of restraint. The biker felt a pang of shame, but also a strange sense of gratitude. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that authority and calm confidence carried power far beyond mere noise or aggression. It was a lesson he would not forget. The guitarist, now more composed, approached the biker cautiously, setting the broken guitar gently aside. There was no anger in his eyes, only a recognition that the situation had been resolved without further harm. The biker nodded, a small but sincere gesture of acknowledgement. It wasn't a full apology, but it was a start, a recognition of his mistake and the consequences that followed. The calm figure, having ensured that the situation was under control, stepped back slightly, allowing the room to breathe again. The tension lifted gradually, replaced by a renewed sense of normalcy. The music began to fill the space once more, softer at first, then building as the band resumed their performance. The crowd, still captivated by the earlier events, adjusted their attention, blending relief with continued admiration for the intervention they had witnessed. The biker stood quietly, reflecting on the events. He understood that his arrogance had nearly caused harm, and that he had been fortunate that authority had intervened before things escalated further. The lesson was clear and personal. Confidence without respect and control could lead to regret, and impulsive actions carried consequences beyond immediate understanding. He had learned in a moment that felt both terrifying and humbling that true power lies not in dominance but in control and awareness. Slowly, he moved away from the stage, his steps measured and careful. The crowd watched, noting the transformation. What had begun as a chaotic display of arrogance had become a moment of personal reckoning. The biker's instant regret was visible, an unspoken acknowledgement of the lessons he had learned. The room, once tense and uncertain, now hummed with a sense of restored order, the music acting as a reminder that life continued beyond mistakes. The audience whispered among themselves, discussing the dramatic turn of events. The calm authority that had intervened became the topic of admiration, while the biker's visible regret added a human element to the story. It was a reminder that everyone makes mistakes, but the way they are confronted, and the way consequences are understood, defines character and growth. The night, which had been threatened by reckless arrogance, was now a powerful demonstration of humility and respect. As the music played on, the biker remained in the background, reflecting on what had transpired. He understood that this moment would stay with him, not just as an embarrassment, but as a turning point. The realization that his actions could have caused far more damage lingered, shaping his thoughts and decisions. He had been reminded in the clearest possible terms that arrogance meets authority and that consequences are inevitable when respect is absent. The calm figure remained nearby, a silent guardian ensuring that the night continued safely. His presence reinforced the lessons learned, demonstrating that authority and composure carry far more weight than aggression and chaos. The biker's instant regret was visible to all, a human and relatable reaction that emphasized the impact of impulsive behavior. The crowd, musicians, and even the biker himself recognized the profound nature of the moment. By the time the music reached its full rhythm again, the biker had stepped away from the immediate scene, his posture subdued and reflective. The audience had returned to enjoying the performance, but the memory of the confrontation lingered. The incident had become more than just an interruption. It had become a story of human nature, humility, and the power of calm authority. The biker's journey through arrogance, impulsiveness, and instant regret was now a lesson witnessed by all, one that would resonate long after the night ended. The room had returned to its vibrant energy, the band playing with renewed focus, the crowd clapping and swaying. Yet in every glance at the stage, in every quiet murmur among the audience, the memory of what had transpired remained vivid. The biker's instant regret, the calm authority that had intervened, and the restoration of order were etched into the experience, creating a story that everyone present would carry with them. It was a reminder that arrogance is fragile, and that true authority commands respect in ways that words alone cannot convey. The aftermath of the incident settled over the venue like a gentle wave, slowly washing away the tension that had gripped the room moments earlier. The biker remained in the back, his posture subdued and reflective. He had stepped away from the stage, giving space to the musicians and the audience, and yet he couldn't ignore the weight of what had just occurred. Every glance from the crowd reminded him that his actions had consequences, and that his arrogance had been confronted in the most undeniable way. People in the audience were still talking quietly, sharing their impressions of the confrontation. Some shook their heads in disbelief, marveling at how calmly the authority figure had intervened. Others whispered about the biker's sudden shift, noting the instant regret and the clear lesson it had taught. There was a sense of relief mixed with admiration. The night had nearly been ruined by one person's recklessness, yet it had been saved by composure and control. The lesson was visible to everyone, and it resonated deeply. The band had taken a few moments to regain their focus. The guitarist gently adjusted the broken instrument, trying to make the best of the situation. The drummer tapped lightly, getting back into rhythm, while the singer nodded to the audience, signaling that the music would continue. Slowly, the sound of the instruments filled the room again, blending seamlessly with the soft chatter of the crowd. It was as if the music itself was a reminder that life could move forward after chaos, that moments of reckoning could lead to understanding and growth. The biker lingered, watching the music resume. He felt a mix of shame and awe, his mind replaying every detail of the confrontation. The calm authority had not only stopped his reckless behavior, but it also made him realize how fragile his own confidence had been. He thought about the adrenaline that had fueled his actions and the hollow feeling that followed. It was a humbling experience, one that would not be forgotten easily. He understood that respect and control were far more powerful than noise, aggression, or the illusion of dominance.